I'm going to read to you guys from a few poems. I'm going to start with a few poems from the chapbook that I just mentioned, or that was just mentioned. It is so new that I don't even have any of my own author copies yet. Otherwise, I would have been reading from those. But it's a chapbook. Again, it's called Girls Mistaken for Ghosts, and a lot of it is poems written in the voices of different girls and what it means to be a girl, this sort of weird, fragile, strange creature that girlhood is. And it also, just like the rest of my poems, deals with ideas of loss, what ghosts can look like in our lives, in our own selves, and things like that. So I'll read a couple poems from that chapbook. This first one is called I Write the Dead. I write the dead, but she is not one of them. I hear her in the history of vowels, the confession of smoke that finally understands it came from flames. When rain comes to relieve the stone of its words, a girl imagines growing old with gloves. Gardening her elders, a girl climbs the vines alone. She sees bird heads in the dark holes, cheery openings in painted wood. A girl wants to chase the wake, ride the swings creaking, squeak through dock slats. A girl requires charcoal to tend her wounds. She rests her head on spider webs and remembers to dry her wings. When a girl converses with birds, she chews their language for her young. A girl's own girls crawl out of their houses, high above the ground, and dissolve into a cloud of leaves. The smoke waited for me, doused my arrival. A girl doesn't need matches. She brings her own fire. Okay, so this next poem is, I wrote it, or I started writing it when I was at an artist residency program in Nebraska, at the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center in Nebraska, which is home to like Arbor Day. That's where Arbor Day got its start. So they have this really beautiful park where there are lots of different trees. And there's a statue for Daphne, right, from Greek mythology. So Daphne was being pursued by a suitor. And in order to preserve her innocence, her chastity, her virginity, she begged her father to save her, and he turned her into a tree, right? So Daphne is the goddess of trees and things like that. And she probably wasn't too thrilled about that particular outcome. But this poem is called The Hunted Girl, and it's based on that mythology. There are some quotes here from a source I should have written down. I did write it down in my book. I don't have it here, but it's something about this story, some story from Greek mythology. Okay. The Hunted Girl. Dipped in lead, dipped in gold, I shaped the harmony of songs and strings. A fetching oracle, he'll overtake me. Turn me, Father. Mother, receive me into your earth mouth. Bind me into the tightest wreath, and I'll never tremble. I only wanted a cushion of air around me. Only my breath, the breath of my girls, in our pursuit of deer, wrapping me like a shroud. I never wanted to be someone's fertile prize, but I never wanted to be still. Before this, I was a desert with a great river running through me. A river for girls to bathe in, for pink-tongued deer to drink from. Now my branches are stilled confluence. Now the birds shriek at me, infest my hair. Now creatures burrow in my skin, bore holes, stuff me with their treasures. I am a secret box for lovers whom I despise. My feet wedded to the ground, some anthills there. My eyes confounded by moss. I see only the fringe of decay, sweeping everything. I am no corpse, but the coffin in which my body should have lain. Father, you are my author, sure as my marrow. Now my petulant winged fruit flies. I wound my enemies, I wound wild beasts, even with my midrib broken. I wound the tips of arrows, pluck untouchable strings. Mother, console him, bound to me, evergreen and entwined, the stiff wreath of victory with teeth, the promise of resurrection, swallowing the girl before she knew. If I tear away branches, if my leaves droop and wither, If dawn flees the morning sun, if each light returns eternal. In case of scented flowers, keep a moist cloth in your pocket. In case of poisonous berries, rinse your mouth with river water, a quiverful. We can't choose how we're saved, or if. So this next one doesn't appear in the chapbook, but it sort of thematically relates. So I use a lot of found text in my poems. Some poems later that I'll come to use text from epitaphs that I find in cemeteries. New England is such a great place to go cemetery hunting. And that's what I do a lot. I use text from signage in national parks, things like that. And in this one, I was reading an article about Clara Blandick, who played Auntie M in The Wizard of Oz, and she left this very sort of heartbreaking note when she committed suicide. So that's great. But so this is not so much in her voice, but some of the language in that note was just so heartbreakingly beautiful that I wanted to think about how to incorporate that into a poem that's, again, related to this idea of sort of losing oneself, losing one's girlhood, losing one's ability to understand what happens with death. So the title comes from her note, and there's just a couple pieces of language from that and from other popular cultural sources as well. So this is called I Am Now About to Make the Great Adventure. One Sunday afternoon, I lay out my histories and construct comfort from trinkets, only some of which will remember me. My childhood coastal, I select a soft blue dress to ghost me. I've prayed a golden pattern into the coverlet. Lover man, oh, where can you be? I imagine a tornado sweeping over me, spinning implements across my skin. Harrow and hand cradle fling the grime of plains and palm trees. It is all over my body. I've always preferred a city's glamour, something safer than a homestead. Sometimes I raise orphans to catch black stars, grade palms. Sometimes I am uncredited. Soon I will perch, piece together shop-worn scenes, share my catalog of secrets with the Hollywood sign, and encourage other timid jumpers. Yet I can't even imagine my arrival, the vehicle that will drop me into the next world. Not my makeup, nor my maker. No place for the burden of decades, names, faces, the smear of newsprint sealed into my pinkest layer. Tethered now only to speculation, I will recline into the blindness of it, hover inside the impending marvel, smoothing my lines until they fade and I appear. So this poem is the last one from the chapbook that I'll read. It's a short poem. It's called Nocturne, parentheses, Optical Phenomenon. And the tiniest bit of context, sometimes in the winter when you're outside, it's really cold. And if you're in a place where you can see the moon, sometimes the moon has this very weird sort of like halo around it. So I saw that one night and I was just so mesmerized by it, and I wanted to look up and learn all about it, but I'm not super inclined toward the scientific. So what I read didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I sort of, some of the ideas of it resonated with me, sort of what that haloed moon, that image just sort of stuck with me. And this idea that it is an optical phenomenon, it's something that we're seeing because of all these angles and the different crystals and all this stuff. Anyway, so it's called Nocturne, Optical Phenomenon. Afterwards, I looked it up. Those icy stars are pecked pearls, numbered. A story with 6 sides, 22 degrees. A haloed moon means bad weather coming through noisy, lit-up nights. Mid-sleep, a surge of birdsong. It's impossible to discern individual wings. Our thin limbal rings, compared to the sparrowhawk's sclera, are sadly lacking. Black branches perch in the east, winding together and parting like bobby pins in a pink scalp. Our tongues split precisely along beak slits. I thought our home was hedge-proof. Spring is for trimming, for gathering storm-washed shoots. Never trust anyone or anything that sings about the moon. So these next couple poems, I'm going to read just a few more, are from a manuscript in progress, which is tentatively titled "This document should be retained as evidence of your journey," and it's a manuscript that primarily deals with the relationship between the living and the dead. Thinks about what are these sites of language where we find the living and the dead overlapping. Again, I mentioned reading epitaphs, looking at interpretive signs in different places, and thinking about how language can mediate our experience of a place. And also thinking about how our relationship with the dead can mediate our experience of sort of just everyday life. So lots of dead people in all of these poems. And when you think about the dead and when you think about poetry, you can't help but think about Whitman. And so this poem, there's a very small allusion to Whitman. And I also heard in one of Taylor's poems an allusion to Whitman. And I thought, all right, we're doing it. But it's toward the end of the poem. It's very small. Okay, so this is called Understory, which is also what the bottom layer of leaves are called in a forest, right? The understory. When the dead speak, we have to listen. They coach this puffed up season, this fertile mantle. They own our palest reflections, which create their own dangers. In the house of roots, they pass through small rooms and balk at each threshold. They perch alone among trees like cold creatures, curve and hunch, fur and bluster, the overhanging shadows that fold themselves neatly into our beds. Past the pane, the sky between the branches. Blue leaves surprised by red flowers, yellow-budded pine cones split by cicadas, a trunk netted by sliding weeds. Their skin is the winter sky between the branches. In the cradle of evening, the cool, endless rocking, the dead steal our wings. No time to learn to die. Oh, but then the moment just before, that last lost calling, the body lets go its gentle grip. Every branch bends and lifts, the great exhale. We press our ears to the canopy. Okay. This next one had the working title of Lifeboat, which is not terribly good as a title. And then the more I was sort of thinking about this poem, and I was listening to this hip-hop artist named Dessa, and she has this great line where she says something like, "Women and children, let me tell you, I've been both, and it's a myth, we all sink in the lifeboat." So this idea of women and children first in the lifeboat, and this outdated idea of sort of chivalry and what will save us, right? In this earlier poem, I have this idea of what can actually save us, this idea that we can't even be saved from real mortal danger. So this is just a short piece called the Birkenhead Drill, which again is the name for that women and children first drill that we used to hear about. An ornament of light decorates real danger, scolds our reckless passage. Stumps float in the mirror moon path or stack solid from the seabed. Prepare for your grave enlightenment. Unravel your ultraviolet hair, which will fling into the foam. On this undersunned, tilted starboard, salt sanitizes our armless hands. Wind steals cold from clanging buckets, and we barnacle our anchor. If rescue fails, we'll outsink the scavengers with stale bait, our ankles wrapped in coral. And two more. So this one, going back to sort of the idea of mythology and being inspired by different myths. This one takes a little bit of inspiration from the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, right, where Orpheus follows Eurydice into the underworld and is told to not look back as he's able to lead her out, and then he of course does look back and ruins everything, and she winds up in the underworld forever. But this idea of so desperately wanting back the people that we've lost is just really resonates with me. So this is called When Presented in Apparition. We carry our bored corpse along the bitter path, hook cross the hill's jawline. The trail finds narrow hinges to hoard. In the gorge, our coarse tongues bud and grift. It's a gift, love. Birds dangle like leaves, twinge under wing. Together we float a fine net of veins, dredge our insides for sawflies. We learn to puncture empty pockets, to skeleton each surface. Such filthy sweet blood, I have to wear gloves. Then we scent each other's folds. While I worry your seams, you're bitten to tatters. Then all your bones have to be accounted for, counted and reburied. I ask for a river where ghosts roost and chatter. Paddle to the underworld and back, the hull of you poised to pock and founder. Finally falling uphill, some of us die by the greasy sunrise. It's an art, dear, to wear our walking. Still some 100,000 miles to forge, and the trees want to speak, but no tongues, no teeth. And this last one I'll close. It's called Dangerous Ground, and this is one of the poems where I like to incorporate text from, this one's particularly from some signage found at this site called Solitary Geyser up in Yellowstone National Park, where you have to hike, a couple miles up, and then there's just this one tiny geyser that goes off fairly regularly. It's not super spectacular, but it's this really beautiful spot. And again, this idea of combining this text with thinking about loss and landscape and our experience of mourning the dead and trying to reconnect with the dead in the world we inhabit. Okay, so this is called Dangerous Ground. Recently, it began again. Vibrations, surface wave motion, audible thumps. Then the solitary roar as superheated stone dries and crumbles. New bubbles form. Thin crusts conceal scalding water. You are here. A layer of sinter on tree skeletons, that gray work shirt laundered through clotted steam vents. A kind of tomb building, slow as centuries. This might be some lost, lame planet. A mobile's single swinging object, useless machine. From afar, it is an island, a bobbing mass, lost anchor. You can almost touch it. Wear your acid boots, your dormant hot cone, your bacteria chain apron with lace-edged pools. Let your hair down. We're all thermophiles here. Then you feel sick. Beneath the skin of your skull, a network of fractures and fissures forms. If you feel sick, leave. Leave your body immediately. Imagine you were here at the Canary Spring, you who won the beauty pool, whose water is hottest, yellow, colorless, whose plumes most delicately curl. You are a single stroke across a muddied palette, a new pattern of drinkable gold, the underside of a black fan. A mirror to the morning glory, a mortal. You are the wind as it shifts the steam toward the trees, and it may have shifted again. Between the tellings, another eruption. They say you can predict it. At the end of the trail, I sit on a sagging wooden bench and wait for the black sand to sing. Thank you.